Good evening. On behalf of the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council, I welcome you all to this forum for candidates for Los Angeles City Council District 5. My name is Travis Longcore. I'm president of the Neighborhood Council. We're pleased to offer this opportunity to our stakeholders to hear from the candidates on a range of issues important to the Hillsides, to Council District 5, and to the City of Los Angeles. Our outreach committee, led by Vice President for Operations Robin Greenberg, has organized this forum with the League of Women Voters to provide an independent, nonpartisan forum for all candidates qualifying for the ballot. Our moderator this evening is Tom Carson, who's been a member of the League of Women Voters for almost 40 years. He's currently serving on the Voter Service Committee of the League of Women Voters of California, as well as being a member of the Voter Service team of the local chapter in Los Angeles. He has had extensive experience managing and moderating candidate forums for national, state, county, and municipal elections. Welcome. Thank you, Tom. And he will be your host for the remainder of the evening.
Thank you, Travis. The League is very pleased to be co-sponsoring this forum with the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council. The League of Women Voters is celebrating its 102nd birthday this year, along with our local chapter in Los Angeles, having been started right after women won the right to vote in 1920. Our local chapter is sponsoring forums throughout the area. For almost 50 years, the League has also been open to both men and women, as I'm a witness of. We are strong supporters of the election process, and the League joins our co-sponsoring partner in encouraging all voters to vote themselves and to reach out to family members and friends to encourage them to vote as well. For the June 7th election, the deadline for registering to vote or to change your registration is May 23rd. However, after that date in Los Angeles County, a person can conditionally register to vote at the county registrar's office or any vote center up until June 7th, the election day, and still be able to participate in the election, subject to subsequent verification. Today's candidate forum rules call for adherence to the terms of civil discourse by both candidates and the audience. The hallmark of democracy is the willingness of all members of our community to treat each other with courtesy and respect, not just the people that we agree with. It is in that spirit that we are here this evening to engage in a vital part of our democratic process, a civilized discussion of the important issues that confront our communities. Attacks of a personal nature, including private matters having no bearing on a candidate's public persona or ability to perform the duties of the office in a competent, ethical manner, will not be tolerated. A vitally important factor in making our democracy work is the willingness of individuals to participate as candidates for public office in our elections. So we want to thank all of the candidates this evening for the efforts they are making. The audience here today is invited to submit written questions to be asked of the candidates. Please do so through the question function. Questions may only be submitted through the first 6 rounds of questions. Please be aware that we often receive a number of questions on the same topic. So in such a situation, we will choose one of them to use or maybe blend several together into a new question. Also, depending on the number of questions submitted, we may not have sufficient time to use all of them within our time limit this evening. This forum is being recorded, and the video of the forum is the joint property of the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council and the League of Women Voters. This recording will be made public, but may not be used without the express written permission of the 2 owners. Any showing of the video must be the whole video without any editing. I would like to begin by introducing all of the qualified candidates for this election. They are listed in alphabetical order by first name. Candidates, please raise your hand when I call your name. Mr. Jimmy Biblarz, Ms. Katy Young Yaroslavsky, Mr. Sam Yebri, and Mr. Scott Epstein. Each question will be addressed to all of these candidates, but the order the candidate responds to each question will vary. For example, the initial question will first be addressed to the first candidate, Mr. Biblarz, and then to the other candidates in order that I just specified. The second question will first be addressed to the second candidate, Ms. Yaroslavsky, and then to other candidates in the same order, and so on. For each question, each candidate will be allowed the same amount of time to respond to that question. Following the question period, the candidates will be given 2 minutes each for their closing statement. During the question period and the closing statements, the candidates will see a timer on the screen, which will show them their remaining time as they are responding. We will now begin the questions. For the initial question, because of the significance of the topic, we are allowing 2 minutes for each candidate's response, but only 1 minute for the remaining question. So the initial question, the homelessness crisis continues to grow. Trying to find a solution is complicated by the fact that multiple levels of government are involved in that process. What specific activities do you think our city should be focusing on in addressing its part of the crisis solution? Mr. Biblarz, your 2-minute response, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. And please bear with me through tonight. If there are brief coughing fits, I actually have COVID. Unfortunately, I thought I dodged a bullet on that one 2 years in, but happens to the best of us, especially when we're out campaigning. It is wonderful to be here with two organizations I have so much respect for. If I know anything about the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council, is that you run a very tight ship. So I assume nothing less today. To speak about homelessness, obviously the question of the hour and of the race. I think of our homelessness and housing crisis as deeply interconnected and impossible to separate. The analogy I like to use most is an iceberg. The street encampments that we see are the very tip of a much larger housing iceberg. And beneath the surface of the water are hundreds of thousands of Angelino families in economic and housing precarity trying to remain housed. If we're not as attentive to what's beneath the surface of the water as we are to what's above it, we will at best be treading water on this issue. And no matter what intervention we have for the folks above the water, we'll just see a new tip of the iceberg emerge if we're not paying attention to what's beneath it. So to start with specific policies about the top of the iceberg, the street encampments, it's about bringing permanent solutions online as quickly as humanly possible. That requires allowing master lease agreements, adaptive reuse projects, competitive bidding for HHH dollars, reorienting American Rescue Plan dollars toward permanent supportive housing, and investing in robust, sustained, and methodical street engagement for our most difficult to house neighbors, those with severe multiple mental illnesses and substance use conditions. Pushing that lever at the same time, though, as affordable housing interventions. Our plan focuses on underutilized commercial transit corridors in the LA basin. That's streets like Robertson, La Cienega, Melrose, 3rd, and Beverly North-South that are primed to have 3 stories of housing on top of 1 story of commercial real estate. That is the only way we will get the scale of housing we need to take the pressure off our housing ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 2-minute response.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Carson, for moderating, and to the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council for hosting us this evening. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Homelessness is the issue we're facing as a city more so than any other issue, and it's completely untenable. It's unacceptable. And there's no one solution. There are really, to my mind, at least 4 buckets of work we need to be doing all at the same time. And the city needs to be partnering across the 88 cities of LA County and all the way up to the federal government if we want to meaningfully make progress on this really complicated but very critical issue. 4 things. The first is prevention. It's a lot less expensive and much more compassionate to keep someone housed rather than waiting until they fall into homelessness before we connect them to housing and services. We know which populations are overrepresented in our unhoused population. People coming out of jail, people aging out of the foster care system, seniors on a fixed income, and on and on and on. By connecting with them upstream and providing them resources to keep them housed, we can keep them housed. So prevention is 1. Rent support, things like that. There's all sorts of things we can be doing to keep people housed. 2, we need to get people off the streets who are currently off the streets faster. That means building ground up construction takes too long, it's too expensive. We need to take existing housing that's already built and make it affordable and homeless housing. Master leasing existing buildings, adaptive reuse of commercial buildings, hotels and motels, quick solutions to get people off the streets, rental vouchers. 3, we need better coordination between the county and the city. The county provides all the services, mental health, physical health, addiction. They run the health departments that the city depends upon. The city needs to be partnering much more closely, and I'm committed to partnering closely with the 2 county supervisors whose districts overlap with the 5th council district. It's the only way we're going to be successful in getting people off the streets, keeping them off the streets, and getting them the services that they need. Finally, we need more mental health and addiction beds. We simply don't have places for that percentage of the population that's unhoused, that's mentally ill and or addicted, and needs places to go beyond just transition housing into permanent housing. They need more help. So I'm committed to doing all of those things at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your 2-minute response.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Yebri. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, Bel Air-Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council for hosting this important event. I also want to wish my colleague here, Jimmy, speedy recovery. I'm sorry to hear about your COVID. Hope you get well soon, Jimmy, and thank you for joining us today and being such a trooper. This is the key issue of our time, and this is the key issue of this race. And in terms of, we have to tackle this homelessness crisis with urgency, compassion, with more common sense. All of us will talk about prevention, helping tenants. We all agree there. We all talk about the need to build more affordable housing, more affordably and faster, and more workforce housing. We'll talk about different ideas for interim housing as well. But there's 2 areas where we all differ. One is I'm laser focused on mental health. And this is where the County of Los Angeles has failed us. A litany of career politicians at the city and the county built Measure H and Prop Triple H, and it's not working. 5 people a day in the streets of Los Angeles who are unhoused are dying every single night. And what are we doing? Building $837,000 units of housing. We're not building more mental health facilities. The county is failing us on the COVID response, the mental health response, and built an agency that's failed called LASA, which is responsible for this work. The other area where I differ from my 3 colleagues is I'm the only candidate who's committed to making sure that people who are suffering on our streets get transitioned into interim housing immediately. And while we do that, I'm the only candidate that's going to use every tool available, including anti-camping ordinances, to help people move out of our parks, off our schools, off lawns, out in front of businesses, into the shelters. I'm the only candidate who's consistently and robustly supports that anti-camping ordinance because it will save lives. And if we don't do it, what are we seeing? There were 3 encampment fires in CD5 in this last week alone. We deserve better, and our leaders and staffers at the county who've built out this approach to mental health are failing. We need new approaches.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 2-minute response.
Thank you so much to the League of Women Voters and Bel Air-Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council for hosting tonight. I spent 9 years in the neighborhood council space, so it's wonderful always to be in these spaces. So this is the essential issue. I will say that we need to do a number of things. One is, we know that our unhoused population is very diverse, right? Folks like LGBTQIA youth, mental health and substance abuse issues, domestic violence victims, and all sorts of other groups. So we need a comprehensive outreach system that meets the individual needs of our unhoused neighbors and connects them to the services that they need. That's number 1. Number 2 is we need to get both temporary arrangements and permanent supportive housing built much more quickly. So when I'm talking about temporary arrangements, I'm talking about things like safe camping, safe parking that will stabilize people's lives, give them services, storage, showers, and allow them to start to get their feet back under them. And then we have not delivered the permanent supportive housing quickly enough. And as a result, it's much more expensive than it need be. There are great projects, including one in South LA that delivered a bungalow court at $200,000 a unit. We need to be much more creative and get these projects up more quickly. And then finally, what I will say is our housing crisis and our homeless crisis are inextricably linked. And so we need comprehensive housing reform to get us out of this situation, because we're housing more people than we've ever housed before, and yet new Angelenos are falling into homelessness every day. So that means we need to build a lot more housing, build it more affordably with housing reform, and we need to better protect our renters because evictions are one of the #1 ways that people fall into homelessness. So that looks like a fully funded right to counsel and much better data collection around our housing market.
Thank you. The next question is first directed to Ms. Yaroslavsky. It is important that Hillside communities be properly placed in electoral districts which allow their voices to be best heard. Given the widespread controversy over the new district electoral maps drawn by the City Council, would you support transferring this power to a completely independent Citizens Redistricting Commission for the City of Los Angeles? Please explain.
Yes, I think it's really important that politics is removed from this process. We saw how people's districts were pulled out from under them. Communities that had just voted in a new council member lost that council member. Lines were radically redrawn at the last minute. It's not okay. Same thing happened at the county, the Board of Supervisors. And that actually had a mostly independent redistricting commission. So I think we really need to make sure that it's truly independent and that it has the freedom and time and space to do the work that it needs to do to make sure it's that the districts that are being drawn comply with federal law. Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your 1-minute response, please.
Yes, I would support that. I actually came out with a 5-point plan on government reform early in my campaign. It's available on my website. And one of those points had to do with the redistricting reform. Our so-called independent commission was a sham. The city council members appointed the individuals for whom by whom these decisions would be made. And the city council members had the power to remove those commissioners. And ultimately, whatever those commissioners came up with, the city council members were able to throw it out. That's not independent. And in fact, it goes to a greater culture of corruption, cronyism, that career politicians at the city and the county have built in our city. And you can draw a direct line between the decline of quality of life, the increase in crime, the homelessness crisis on our streets, and the decline in quality city services that we deserve in a world-class city that we're not getting. Draw that line to the people that we've elected over and over again. We've elected tired bureaucrats and career politicians, and they're not doing their job. And it's time for new leaders from the outside. And my 5-point plan on government reform is on my website at samforla.com.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 1-minute response, please.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a necessity. So the redistricting process was rife with political interests. You know, the point of this process is to draw districts for the people, not for incumbent politicians to draw their own districts. You know, we should be choosing politicians, not politicians choosing voters. And so this has to change. It's a real problem of public confidence. And I felt it personally in this race. I will share that my home was drawn out of this district for a few weeks. And I will never know whether that was because of somebody who had a political agenda. And so that's just one example of this crisis of political confidence that this current process creates.
Thank you. The next question is first directed to Mr. Yebri.
I think I have to answer.
Let me give you the question.
No, the last question. It's Jimmy Biblarz.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I love this question. Leave it to the League of Women Voters to ask a political process question. I would expect nothing less, and I'm very grateful for the question. It's one we've never actually been asked, and that doesn't happen very often in our almost 30 debates. So absolutely, I support independent redistricting. I think the number of people who know what map K2, map K2.5 is an increasingly fleeting and small group of people, many of whom are probably on this call. However, going as intimately through the redistricting process as we did, as candidates just expose the flaws of a redistricting system that is so reliant on political appointees and a small cadre of folks that routinely serve on these kinds of commissions. This is an absolutely essential reform, but I would be remiss to suggest that it is the only anti-corruption reform that is necessary for the city council. And not to bring back any traumatic law school memories for anyone, but it is a necessary, but by no means sufficient political reform. And I hope we have opportunities to talk about some of the land use corruption issues that are also very present in our city.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is directed to Mr. Yebri first. Many hillsides are rapidly losing precious, protected, and significant trees due to overdevelopment. What do you believe the city should do to strengthen the current protected tree ordinance? Your 1 minute response, please.
So this is a great question because it affects the Santa Monica Mountains that we all hold dear. It's a public health issue because we know how important trees are to the cleanliness of our air and issues of heat as well. There's a ridgeline ordinance that in part was designed to curb overdevelopment on our hillsides. I think there's a right compromise that could be struck on that. I hope we can talk about the ridgeline ordinance as well. I think it's imperative that the city of Los Angeles enforce its laws. We're not doing it with respect to trees. We're not doing it with respect to development. We're not doing it with respect to Airbnbs, oil and gas wells. The list goes on. And we need a council member who will work with the next city attorney to make sure that the ordinances on the books are enforced and there are no loopholes. And I think there's no better return on investment of our dollars to plant more trees. The tree canopy is imperative to our environment. It's all throughout the 5th district. We're badly in need of planting more trees. I'm going to prioritize building more parks and planting more trees as a council member.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 1 minute response, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So I'm a guy who supports a lot of new housing construction in the 5th, but not on the hillsides. We need it adjacent to transit and services and jobs and that's in the flats. And so one way to protect our canopy in the Santa Monica Mountains is to actually get the wildlife ordinance done. This is another example of a good idea that City Hall has not followed through on. It's not that cheap, not that expensive to move forward on it. We need to hire a couple planners to finish the wildlife ordinance so that we can protect our trees, protect natural habitats in our beautiful Santa Monica Mountains. And I will also add that we need to build tree canopy across this district. We have major shade equity issues. Multifamily communities in the 5th district have a lot less shade, and I've planted hundreds of trees as a neighborhood council chair, and I plan to do that across the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1 minute answer, please.
So we know that the tree replacement ordinance has been painfully under enforced. And I think that comes at its core from a failure to recognize why we have a tree replacement ordinance. And something like trees can feel like a minor issue. It can feel like a small group of really committed people who care about this, but not something that affects the general population. And that's why it can be easy to ignore or sweep under the rug. That's not how I see this issue. And that's why our enforcement regime, when I'm elected, is going to change the orientation to one that sees trees as a pivotal and permanent climate investment in reducing carbon emissions, a quality of life investment, and an aesthetic desirability investment, because we know that wooded and tree canopied neighborhoods are the ones that most people want to live in and feel the best in. To do so, it's about prioritizing neighborhood services, bringing the right attitude and energy and approach to this issue, and streamlining redundant offices involved in the tree canopy business. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 1 minute response.
Thank you. So I'm an environmental and land use attorney, and for me, and for many people, trees are a key part of our climate infrastructure. It's how we make our city more climate resilient. And it's what makes the Santa Monica Mountains so special and worth preserving and saving. The Community Forest Advisory Committee at the city is doing some really important work around this. I had the chance to meet with them at their last meeting a couple weeks ago. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. One, almost 80% of our tree canopy in the city of LA is actually on private property. And so replacing a 100-year-old beautiful tree with a new sapling is not is not enough. And we're going to keep losing tree cover if we don't start to protect more of our trees and create a process by which there's a presumption that you can't just knock down a bunch of big old trees and replace them with a bunch of much smaller ones, and that's okay. So I think siting issues are really important, building in a process to make sure we're presuming that older trees are going to be protected, not just native ones.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, the next question will be first addressed to Mr. Epstein. What steps do you think the city should take to amend or ensure enforcement of the city's short-term rental ordinance to crack down on party houses and other illegal and dangerous uses? Your 1 minute response, please.
Thank you for the question. This is a huge issue in the hillsides and in the flats as well. It's a problem for quality of life. It's also a problem for our housing crisis because we're losing our housing stock to these parties and to these rentals. And so we have an ordinance, as you mentioned, but it hasn't been properly enforced. So we need to make sure that we hire the right staff, that they're properly trained, and that we're actually enforcing these laws. And part of that is we need a lot more tax revenue in this city. So we need to invest in our commercial boulevards so that our small businesses can grow and we can bring more tax revenue in so that we can fund enforcement and all of the important services of this city.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1 minute response, please.
Absolutely. So I read the neighborhood council's very thorough 18-page document about enforcement of party house ordinances this morning, and it was really a treasure of a document. The labor that has gone into that is a testament to the severity of this problem for your communities. It's also a problem on the housing affordability side. We know that taking affordable housing off the market for short-term rentals has been devastating for pockets of the city. I'll say three things. First is ordinance drafting. We need to hire lawyers to our city council offices who are expert at legal drafting. We are over-reliant on the city attorney's offices to draft these ordinances that are chock full of holes, making them very difficult to enforce. Second is working with companies. We have been very successful at working with Airbnb in particular at this. Most of the problem houses are no longer Airbnb, but are third parties or more minor companies. When we work with the companies, it puts corporate pressure on these houses. And lastly, having a designated person in my office to put additional pressure on the processes and work through that 18-page document with you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 1 minute response.
So for anyone who's ever lived near a party house, you know that this is a huge quality of life issue. And for those of you who live up in the hillsides, which is most of you on this call, it's wildly unacceptable. And it sort of defeats the purpose of why you live up in the mountains in the first place, to have peace and quiet and be out in nature. I have zero patience for the lack of enforcement. And really, there's no point in having laws on the books if we're not going to enforce them. I think it sort of promotes this idea that we're lawless, which a lot of people are feeling right now in LA. I'm committed to partnering with our city departments and the city, especially the city attorney's office, to make sure violations are actually enforced and violators are held accountable. And at the same time, we need to be working with all of the short-term rental companies, not just Airbnb, to make sure that the laws on the books are being enforced and that they've come up with procedures to make sure that they're kicking off violators from their sites. Because if we can cut them off from having access to those sites, they won't be able to rent out their houses anymore. So I know this is a complicated issue. I'm looking forward to working with the community to make sure that we're nipping this in the bud as much as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your 1 minute response.
So this is a massive issue in the hillsides, but it's also a massive issue throughout CD5, and it's also a public safety issue. Like everything else in the city of Los Angeles, the city's approach is inefficient and ineffective. So there's actually 3 ordinances that are at play here. There's the home sharing, the party house, and also the noise ordinance. And we have a fragmented response. So city planning is responsible for the home sharing registration, building and safety is responsible for citations. The city attorney is responsible, their neighborhood prosecutors for enforcement. And if there's a party, there's LAPD, there's parking enforcement, and fire, if there's a fire issue here in sanitation, but there's no coordination. The buck gets passed around and laws aren't getting enforced. And what happens is neighborhood councils and HOAs and residents have to act. They have to document and nag the city to do its job. And that's a broken system. So my council office is going to be quarterbacking this issue. We're going to make sure the ordinances work. If there's loopholes, we'll make sure that those get fixed. And we need to make sure they're enforced. There's some really strong rules about home sharing in terms of it has to be your primary residence and only 6 months and paying fees. And we got to make sure those fees and fines get collected, which they're not right now.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, the next question will be first addressed to Mr. Biblarz. Many longtime Hillside residents have recently had their homeowners insurance policies canceled with little or no explanation other than fire risk. What can the city do to ensure that property owners are able to obtain comprehensive insurance coverage even in very high fire hazard zones? Your 1 minute response.
This is a really important question, especially for longtime homeowners who did not buy into the neighborhood with the severity of fire risk that we currently live with. So to begin, the idea that every person should be able to have their home safely before and after a fire is a baseline for the kind of city that we all deserve to live in. And that means ensuring that post-fire, people are able to return to their homes. On the specific insurance question, the best we can do at the city level is pressure and working with state and federal colleagues to ensure that folks don't have their insurance policies yanked out from under them. Putting the pressure directly on insurance companies from the city council sends a strong message, but it's ultimately going to take state intervention to see state legislation that we will lobby tooth and nail for to get this law on the books. Thank you.
Mr. Biblarz, please. I'm sorry, I missed it. Ms. Yaroslavsky.
Thank you. So the fire insurance issue is a big one. We've been hearing about it now increasingly for years. It's making people's homes suddenly a lot less affordable. And as Jimmy mentioned, this is one of those places where I think it's really important that the council collaborates with state partners because they need to be bringing legislation to change the rules and requirements around insurance. To mandate insurers to provide it. And if that means the government needs to subsidize that to make it pencil out for insurance companies, then we need to do that because people should have need the stability that's provided by insurance. And the city alone can't make sure that that's the case. And so partnering with the state, I have very good relationships with state partners in the assembly and the legislature whose districts cover the 5th council district. And I've already started having conversations with some of them about how we might make meaningful progress on this issue.
Mr. Yebri, your 1 minute response.
Sure. On the specific issue of insurance, we obviously have to work with our legislature and the California Insurance Commissioner to address the concerns, but equally important is the underlying issue of why insurance companies don't want to insure some of these homes, and that's the risk, right? So one is we have to make sure that we have really smart policies for development, make sure there's that we don't overdevelop the ridgelines and the hillsides. We have to make sure the fire department in Los Angeles is proactive and well-funded. I visited the local stations 71 and 108, 109, and they're undermanned. And some of our police stations, fire stations in the 5th district are down to the levels of staffing from the 1970s. And that's a big issue. We're down to about 3,300 fires in the city, and that's not okay. And then we got to make sure we don't worsen the issue by overdeveloping. And then we can't take away private rights of people's homes in the event that there is a fire. We need to have a right balance on ridgeline ordinance planning. And I look forward to being part of that conversation as a council member.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 1 minute response.
Well, I would agree with my colleagues that this is an issue that is going to take collaboration across multiple levels of government. And I stand ready to make sure that we protect our homeowners in the hillsides. And I would add that, the elephant in the room is our climate crisis, right? That is the true underlying issue that's leading to this higher level of fire at risk. And so That is also a very big issue across multiple levels of government, but there are a lot of levers here locally that we have to be pursuing with vigor, from redesigning our streets, to building more housing near transit jobs and services, to moving to 100% clean, renewable energy as fast as possible. I'm glad the city made that goal. Now it's time that we get there. Those are the underlying policy issues that are going to protect our city and our hillsides.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1 minute response.
I already went.
Oop. My mistake. Sorry. Okay, the next question is addressed to Ms. Yaroslavsky. Will you commit to extending the hillside construction regulations to cover all hillside areas in Council District 5 and to updating them to close loopholes that allow homes to be built over height if they cascade down canyon slopes? Please explain.
Yes, absolutely. So the construction ordinance right now exempts pockets of the Santa Monica Mountains, and it needs to be extended to include all of them. We have people building 50, 60,000 square foot houses and calling them single family houses. They're basically taking off the tops of hillsides. The impacts to communities are insane and huge. Thousands of truck trips up and down the hillsides, excavating mountaintops. And the extension of the ordinance to include all of the communities within CD5 that want in has been stalled at the planning department for months and months and months. And the first week I'm in office, I'm going to call Vince Bertoni and tell him to push it through if it's not through by then. So absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your 1 minute response.
Yes, well, the hillside construction regulations date back to 2017, and they have loopholes and they weren't expanded throughout the hillsides. I was glad to see that they were extended eventually to Laurel Canyon, to the Bird Streets, but it needs to be extended through the entire area, including Coldwater Canyon, Beaumont Hazen. These are high fire severity zones, and they never should have been exempted in the first place. And it's unacceptable that it's been stuck at the planning department for now well over a year. There's no reason for it. And while that sits there because of bureaucracy, because of lack of leadership, because the city not doing its job, that we're at risk of overdevelopment and potentially massive fires. So we need to make sure that the hillside construction regulations get extended to the entire area to prevent the oversized and environmental destroying development affecting our community.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 1 minute response.
Yes, absolutely. I support extension of the ordinance across the entire hillside in CD5. We have a lot of risks in the hillsides. It's a very different place to develop than the flats. We have fire risk. We have risk related to terrain. And so we need very strong protections in the hillsides to make sure that we're not escalating those risks anymore.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1 minute response.
Absolutely. I think the failure of this ordinance is telling of a few different problems. One is the failure to treat the hillside communities as a connected ecosystem. These carve-outs are incomprehensible from a scientific or from a public policy perspective. I think, though, that the loopholes come from two main arenas. First, bad and open-ended drafting that we see play out routinely, which allows and catalyzes the influence of lobbying. When you have poor drafting of municipal legislation, it opens the door for developers and bad actors to weasel in and get what they want out of these ordinances. We need frequently updated land use protocols. We know that climate risk and fire zone designations are changing rapidly, and our construction and land use protocols and ordinances need to match accordingly. This ultimately goes to a question of the future of our city. It has to have housing near job centers alongside transit in the LA basin.
Thank you. The next question is first addressed to Mr. Yebri. Would you commit to opposing spot zoning, which has taken the form of a single project-specific plan that is inconsistent with the community plan in high-profile hillside situations? What do you believe would be a better solution?
I strongly oppose spot zoning. I strongly oppose the 245 mechanism. That's why I'm so proud to oppose the Benedict Canyon Hotel, to oppose the Berggruen Hotel Institute, which require a specific plan to build and to really overrun the hillsides. I was proud to be the first candidate to come out strongly against those projects in this race. We don't need to develop our hillsides. Another issue is developers have too much influence in our city. I was proud to, on day one of my candidacy, to say that I'm not going to take any money from any developers, active or otherwise. Some of the other colleagues in this race have followed suit. It's an imperative point, and we have to clean up our planning system. It's leading to corruption, and it's inviting corruption soft and hard. And that's why 3 out of the 15 council members representing our 4 million people are now in or facing federal prison, because we've allowed this corrupt system to get worse every day under our watch, and that needs to change right now. I look forward to tightening up our planning and our ethics and campaign finance rules as a council member.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 1-minute response.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just another symptom of our broken land use system, our irrational land use system. So we need comprehensive land use reform that allows more building near transit, near services, near jobs, and closes loopholes around new development in places that make zero sense, like our hillsides, that have no transit service whatsoever, with overtaxed roads and overtaxed infrastructure. We should be keeping the same level of density that already exists in the hillsides and protecting our wildlife. I will be a strong leader for rationalizing our land use system and making sure we get rid of this crazy spot zoning that is frankly plaguing the hillsides. I will be your ally on that.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1-minute response.
Absolutely. So I'm glad we get to talk about another corruption issue here. The way our land use system works, whereby you can have a luxury hotel in the hillside or a square footage ratio addendum to a single family home remodel in Beverlywood. And both of those decisions run through Paul Koretz's signature or whoever the counselor is in whatever part of town. That land use process creates the conditions for quid pro quo corruption. And it's a political process error that is catalyzing the exact type of malfeasance that we need to be preventing as a municipality. So a day one priority for me is removing some of the land use power, the ministerial approval, spot zoning, and variance approval from the individual city council office and moving it toward the experts in transportation and planning who in every other city in the country make these important land use decisions.
Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 1-minute response.
Thank you. So I strongly oppose spot zoning. It is the root of so much of what plagues the city of Los Angeles. And the answer is updating our community plans. As a former land use attorney, I understand how important this is. I understand how politically fraught and hard it's going to be. But if we don't do it, we're never going to get ourselves out of this cycle where we continue to allow developers to propose outlandish things and then negotiate back for something slightly less unreasonable. We need to keep intensified uses out of the Santa Monica Mountains. We don't need more density up in the mountains. What we need is to be buying and preserving open space, keeping it as open as possible. I'm strongly and consistently spoken out against the Benedict Canyon Hotel. I submitted a comment letter almost a year ago in opposition to the project. I'm also opposed to the Berggruen Institute. Densification more broadly. It has no place in our mountains. Our Santa Monica Mountains are one of the great treasures of Los Angeles, and I'm committed to preserving them as such.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question is addressed first to Mr. Epstein. There has been much discussion about building rapid transit over or under the Sepulveda Pass. Do you believe this is feasible? Should our city support it financially? Please explain.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think it's feasible. I think it's necessary. I think it's the solution to a lot of our problems, including problems that Hillside residents face. So we need a rapid transit system that gets people where they need to go. I strongly support a Sepulveda Transit Corridor project with a station at UCLA, because that's where people need to be. That's where tens of thousands of transit-reliant students are. That's where, that's the site of one of our largest employers in the entire county. And so I think it can be done. We have safe technology to tunnel under the hills without impacts to homeowners. It's been proven around the world, including right here in Los Angeles, where the Purple Line has gone very well with tunnel boring machines. I think it can be done. And I think it's going to take a lot of impact off the hillsides, because there will be fewer people driving on
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1 minute response.
Absolutely. Reimagining our city from one that is so desperately reliant on cars to one that embraces multiple forms of transportation, especially public transit, is a transition that we have to make. We know from poll after poll of all Angelenos that folks overwhelmingly want to spend less time in their cars, especially young people, the precise type of young professionals and medical residents and grad students who work at UCLA and Cedars and UCLA Medical Center, who would so benefit from this line between the San Fernando Valley and the West Side. Public transit is an investment in economic opportunity because it provides more people access to job and research-rich neighborhoods. It's an investment in climate because we know there's no better way to reduce carbon emissions than getting cars off the road in Los Angeles. And it's a quality of life issue because traffic is killing us, our mental health and our physical health. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 1 minute response.
Thank you. So to make our city healthier and more livable, we have to make it easier for people to get out of their cars. Our transportation system doesn't get people where they need to go right now. And Council District 5 has the largest job centers outside of downtown LA, and UCLA is one of the largest employers in the entire county. And so it makes sense that we put a station at UCLA. I'm waiting to see what the environmental review process reveals about the alternatives before I weigh in. But whatever route we choose, whether it's above ground or underground, it needs to mitigate impacts for the community that it'll go through or under. We absolutely need to have a metro system that gets people from the valley to the west side to Council District 5 where the jobs are. You drive on the 10 freeway west in the morning or the 405 south and you see cars lined up getting where they need to go. So I'm committed to making sure that gets built out.
Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your 1 minute response.
So I too am excited for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project and public transportation in general. We're gonna have 7 D-line stations, Purple Line station in and around the 5th district. I think it's a climate, public health, and economic imperative, but it has to be done right. Legitimate concerns have been raised by various communities and stakeholders about the different approaches and routes that are being studied. And that's why we have an environmental review process, which is underway. That EIR process will evaluate the various impacts and risks of the different proposed routes. One thing that I'm committed to is to making sure that there is a station located directly on the UCLA campus with a seamless connection to the Purple D line, Westwood UCLA station at Wilshire and Westwood and Gailey. We know that UCLA is the 2nd largest employer in LA County, and it's going to reduce the impact on the Bel Air community. And then one other point, it's imperative that the public transportation be clean and safe in the county of Los Angeles. It's not right now. Ridership is down because people don't feel safe, and our leaders are unwilling to keep us safe and make the investments and speak truth to power. And I will do that as a council member.
Thank you. All right, we will now shift to questions from the audience. The first one will be addressed to Mr. Biblarz. Joyce?
Okay. All right. Are you going to enforce the anti-camping laws, Ordinance 41.18, to clear encampments, parks, sidewalks, etc.?
Thank you for the important question. I'm a professor at UCLA Law School, and I am a research and data-driven academic. I am motivated first and foremost by what we know works to get people off the streets and into housing for good. That is my North Star. We know in places that have dramatically reduced the density of street encampments, they have done two things. First, they have had sufficient supply of permanent, affordable housing that was brought online very quickly. If we look to Houston, that was their model. And they coupled it with robust, sustained, and methodical street engagement from trained mental health care workers who could put their money where their mouth was on services because they had sufficient supply of the right kind of services to keep people enduringly off the street. I do not believe designating zones in the short term. We know there are not enough shelter beds, let alone permanent supportive housing units. If you talk to any homeless care provider or unhoused person, we know that the services do not exist. I am laser focused on what we know works, and it's those two pieces, permanent supportive housing and real street engagement.
Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 1 minute response.
Thank you. So section 4118, the anti-camping ordinance, lists a bunch of places where unhoused people can't sleep, but it doesn't say where they can sleep. And so if you're just going to move people from one sidewalk to another, that's not okay. What we need to be focused on is finding interim and permanent housing for folks, and then using a deep street engagement strategy to connect people to housing that actually works for them. And when you do the work of going out every day, getting to know people, figuring out what they need, and then actually connecting them with the housing and services that meets their needs, you get people off the streets. And so I think 4118, which says where you can't sleep, can be used as a backstop measure, which after you've done a certain amount of street engagement, figured out what people really need, there might be a couple of people who say, well, I'm not quite so sure. Most people will take it if you provide them housing that actually works for them. A motel voucher for a couple of nights doesn't cut it, but when you show people that you're going to get them into permanent housing, that you're going to get them the services they need, most people take it. If they don't, then yes, you can use 4118 to enforce.
Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your 1 minute response.
Top priority as leaders is to alleviate the suffering of people on the streets. And the answer is yes, I will use anti-camping ordinances and every tool available to help transition people who are suffering and now dying on our streets every single day. I'm the only candidate who said that he will use this ordinance on day one. And I'm actually just a little confused and concerned about what I just heard. So Ms. Yaroslavsky told the Northwestwood Neighborhood Council that our city's anti-camping ordinance 4118 is inhumane and ineffective, and she opposes it. And she even told the coalition of CD5 HOAs that she supports camping in public parks. And now she just said something different. The voters deserve to know which is it. And to the voters of the 5th Council District, I will always be straight to you. And I still say the same thing to every group, regardless of who the audience is. And the voters deserve leaders whose words they can believe and whose promises they can trust.
Mr.
Am I going to
Epstein,
get a chance to respond to that at some point, Mr. Carson? Because that was just a bunch of not true stuff.
I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
Great, thank you. So in the context of Westwood Park, the question was asked of me in a long series of yes/no answer interview that was conducted over a period of about 2 hours many months ago when we were in the middle of a COVID surge. And I said, in the context of COVID, it is not acceptable to move unhoused people out of Westwood Park unless you're going to move them into housing. You can't just move them out of the park and put them on the sidewalk. That was interpreted as saying, yes, she supports leaving people in the park. I never said we should let people live in the park. Parks are not for where people should live. People should live in housing. Parks are for all of us to enjoy. 2, the Northwestwood Neighborhood Council.
You've run out of time.
Okay. I'll
Thank you.
use some of my other time for that.
Mr. Epstein, your 1 minute response, please.
So let's be clear. Encampments pose public safety and public health issues for housed folks and unhoused folks alike. It is a major issue, and I support a framework for street engagement that takes into account both the risk that individuals experience on the street and the real issues of street encampments. But that does not mean the anti-camping ordinance is the way to solve that problem. It is a tool, and we're seeing this, to move an encampment from one block to another. it is also a gross misuse of resources. We're spending millions of dollars on signs instead of robust street engagement that's actually going to connect folks to services and temporary housing that can stabilize their lives. Those are the policy tools, not the anti-camping ordinance, that are going to fix homelessness. And those are the policies that I will be robustly supporting as council member.
Thank you. Joyce?
Yes, the skies, oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. The skies over our hillsides are being disturbed by nonstop flights, destroying the quality of life of our residents. What would you do to challenge the FCC over the change in flight patterns?
Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 1 minute response.
So I'm a little bit familiar with this issue because of my time working in Supervisor Kuehl's office. And I think it's really important that we bring the congressman into this conversation. Congressman Sherman needs to be engaged on this issue. He represents the constituents who live over the current flight path. And he needs to also bring in those people who used to have those airplanes flying over their homes that was just shifted south to the Santa Monica Mountains, because we need to figure out a solution that works. Right now, people who bought homes and moved into neighborhoods when there was no planes flying overhead suddenly find themselves where that's not the case. And I think it's the job of government to figure out solutions that work for the most people possible, and having planes flying at low altitude right over our houses in the Santa Monica Mountains is unacceptable. And so coming up with solutions with the FAA, maybe it's quicker drop-ins so that it's not coming in over people's houses up in the hills, but there's got to be some give and take here, because it's completely changed the quality of life for people in the hillsides.
Okay. Mr. Yebri, your 1 minute response.
So while this is a federal issue, obviously Van Nuys Airport, Burbank Airport, LAX to some extent, it impacts our daily lives. And I know one tool we have at the city level is litigation, and there are some pending matters. Our city attorney has brought one. I support that lawsuit, and we'll make sure that we keep fighting it. The city of Los Angeles has a history of giving up in lawsuits, settling them on bad terms, or losing them. And having a litigator who actually has gone to trial and won is badly needed in the city. And I look forward to working with our next city council and city attorney on this issue. I'm also going to have a deputy who's going to be a strong advocate for the hillsides on this issue and all issues. And then, of course, we have to work with our federal partners, been endorsed by several members of Congress. We need to lobby the FAA and our senators to do more on this issue. Frankly, it's a public health issue as much as it's a quality of life issue. And that's the argument we have to make, that this is a public health, public safety issue. And I look forward to fighting on behalf of the residents of Bel Air.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 1 minute response.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely an issue that requires federal involvement. I'd be very interested in having conversations with our congressional partners and convening public conversations around this issue. I will say also that I keep on beating the climate drum, but airplanes are one of the top producers of carbon emissions in our world right now. And so we need to be reducing the number of flights in our country. And part of that is adopting alternatives like high-speed rail. I will certainly use my bully pulpit to support projects like the California high-speed rail project, or the project that would link Las Vegas with Los Angeles, that could replace some of those flights and thereby reduce impacts on our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1 minute response.
Absolutely. So I was at the August 2021 FAA briefing about the proposed redesign of flight paths at the Van Nuys Airport, and I was relatively optimistic at what I saw as a real recognition of the noise pollution that is ruining many people in these communities' lives. Ensuring that those changes happen and that we return to the historic flight paths of especially the Van Nuys Airport is a top priority for my office. We know that this problem is one that has gotten worse, both in the number of flights and in the direction of those flights. And it was a problem to begin with, but the fact that it has deteriorated so significantly is alarming. In terms of what we will be lobbying our federal colleagues for, though, I see 4 key arenas. First, reducing reliance on smaller airports that we know are more embedded in communities. Second, forcing airlines to pay for noise mitigation efforts and forcing airlines to utilize cutting-edge acoustic engineering and noise-canceling technology that we know is out there. And lastly, lobbying for continued investments in alternatives to airline transportation.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz. No,
Um,
no, I'm
just-
sorry, Mr. Epstein.
Yeah,
And I went as well.
Yes, okay.
all right.
Mr.
Are we ready
Biblarz.
for the next question?
No, Mr. Biblarz, did you get it? You didn't get a chance to respond, did you?
Oh, okay.
I did, yes. All
Okay.
good.
All right, go ahead, Joyce.
As CD5 has 2 distinct geographic areas, hillsides and flats. Okay. How do you plan to organize and direct your staff to properly serve each without jeopardizing the needs of the other?
Mr. Yebri, your 1-minute response.
Terrific. So the hillsides have a lot of issues in common. They obviously have different issues as well from the flats, the lower Bel Air and upper Bel Air. I think it's important to have a deputy who understands the communities, who has a history there. I've spent a lot of time myself speaking to the leaders of different HOAs, neighborhood council, understanding traffic issues. I know Bel Air Glen and Bel Air Ridge are involved in an issue regarding gating. There's an issue regarding traffic as well in Beverly Glen. There's a lot of issues that are very specific. So having staff that's nuanced and understands it is imperative. And also being personally involved, right? A lot of this cannot be pushed off of staff. I think it's important that a council member be present, to show up, listen. I've done that as a candidate. I'm proud to have the endorsement of so many members of the neighborhood council listed on my website, including Nikki Miner and Robin Greenberg and so many others, including some of the leaders of the different HOAs, Baja and others. It's time for someone who's going to actually put the residents first on public safety, on homelessness, fighting corruption and overdevelopment, and that's what I intend to do.
Mr. Epstein, your 1-minute response.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, we need a dedicated field deputy for the hillsides. That's really important. I will certainly staff a field deputy for the hillsides. And then the other thing that I would say is that our specialized staff, our legislative staff, focused on issues like transportation, on the environment. I would love to have an environmental deputy, just as Paul Koretz does, on planning and land use, need to be well versed in the issues that face the hillsides, because they are very different and very unique. And so I am going to make sure that my staff are well attuned to those issues and attend community meetings to understand them even better, and are very responsive to the unique needs of the hillsides.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1-minute response.
I love this question because it's ultimately one about the ease of political participation, which is something I'm very passionate about. We know that the hillside communities have issues that are different from the basin, fire, development, and environmental protection. But it's ultimately not all that different in terms of how we are making political accessibility a reality for all folks in Council District 5. I believe in meeting people where they're at. That means at their doors, it means on their phones, and it means reducing the often very onerous barriers that require such immense bureaucratic know-how about how to access your government. The proof is in the pudding. My personal cell phone is on my website. We have every kind of initiative to meet people in person, on Zoom, and on their phones, and that's the kind of office that I hope to maintain. If we look at beloved city council members, not something that happens very often, Tom LaBonge, Bill Rosendahl, they did the same things. They had public meetings, they encouraged constant visibility, and there was a sense of real listening, incorporating feedback, and building trust that was sustained.
Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 1-minute response.
Thank you. Constituent services is the most important job of a council member, providing excellent constituent services, serving as a link between City Hall and our communities, our neighborhoods, our blocks. And so for me, that means being present in our neighborhoods. And I've thought a lot about this question. I plan to have two field offices, one to sort of serve the flats and another one to serve our hillsides. And they'll be very well coordinated on those issues that impact across the district. But the issues in the hillsides are so unique and different and sort of intensive in their level of specificity that I think it's really important to have a field office in the hills. And so I'm committed to doing that, having a full team there, working closely with all the neighborhoods to focus on issues of fire safety, ingress, egress, traffic, public safety, our ordinances, all the cut-through traffic, wildlife, open space, and the like. So I'm really looking forward to staffing that with excellent people who already know those neighborhoods.
Great. Joyce?
All right. There's very significant opposition within CDS, within Council District 5, to the ridgeline and wildlife ordinances that are currently drafted. How familiar are you with the status of the ridgeline and wildlife ordinances? And are your thoughts on how the city has handled the drafting process to date?
Mr. Epstein, your 1 minute response.
Well, I think the city has dragged its feet. I mean, we're looking at the wildlife ordinance doesn't have the planners to complete it. I think they're important ordinances. We need to protect our hillsides, natural habitat. We don't want overdevelopment in the hillsides. But we also do want to balance that with the needs of existing homeowners who may have to, make fixes or rebuild their homes because of maintenance issues. And I think we can square that circle. I think that we can develop an ordinance that allows significant flexibility for folks to be able to maintain their wealth and their livelihood, and also protects our hillsides. It starts with staffing. So one of the top priorities of my office is going to make sure that these positions are finally staffed so that we can make the progress, have those robust conversations with the community, and get it done.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1 minute response.
As far as I understand the current status of these ordinances, they're being combined and details are still being hammered out. So I'm eager to see how this process unfolds. I've learned a lot in the last week about this issue, and I'm eager to follow this story and to learn more. And when you ask us to comment on issues that have not already happened, but are about how we're going to vote or feel about something in the future, it's ultimately a question of how we go about decision making. And I think that's really important. My decision making is rooted in two things: robust and consistent community engagement. That's what I was just talking about with political participation, and top tier academic research. I'm an academic by training. Combining those two things is how you get the strongest public policy. They don't always align, but they more often than not do, and they make our public policy better. I was talking to State Senator Henry Stern the other day, and he talked about folks having a right to rebuild on the hillsides after fire. I think there's a parallel right to maintain your property in high fire, environmentally friendly impact areas, and I'm eager to learn more about this issue as it unfolds.
Ms. Yaroslavsky, your response.
Thank you. So policymaking is a balance, and when it's done right, the outcome is nuanced and thoughtful and reasonable. Good policies come from an inclusive process. I have deep experience in leading these processes. I spent the last 6.5 years doing policymaking around environmental and sustainability issues at the county. It's how I navigated getting Measure W, the Safe Clean Water program, adopted by LA County voters with almost 70% of the vote in 2018. And it's how I'm going to lead on the council. Process is really important. And these two ordinances, while good intentioned and important, but they're good examples of how, when process isn't done right and people aren't at the table, all people aren't at the table, you have unintended consequences. And so I think we need to make sure that these ordinances are nuanced and thoughtful. They allow people to rebuild. They allow for reasonable development, while also protecting our sacred open spaces and keeping as many trees as possible and preserving our ridgelines as much as possible. But again, it has to be a balance.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your response, please.
I agree, these are really important ordinances, but the city's mismanaged the entire process. So first off, it was a mistake to combine the ridgeline and the wildlife ordinances. They're separate issues. Now we're saddled with the problems of both. We're waiting to see what the planning department comes back with. As a starting point, the Santa Monica Mountains are invaluable regional resource that must be preserved from development. But what's murky is a distinction between undeveloped land and developed land. And there are legitimate concerns about the effect of the ordinance on homes that have been there for decades. So I categorically oppose any version of the ordinance that would take away existing property rights. For example, if your house burns down, you should be able to rebuild it, period. But also it shouldn't take a variance from the city to update your house, do repairs, even add a second story. That makes no sense. And then in terms of the wildlife ordinance, it's imperative that we preserve the wildlife friendly nature and biodiversity of the hillsides and ridgelines, but we have to do it in a reasonable way with involvement of the community. We have to make sure the language makes sense. There's no overbroad terms like natural resource. The buffer zones have to make sense, fencing issues. We can do this with smart leadership, which I'll deliver.
Thank you. Joyce?
All right, there were a lot of questions about that ordinance. Let's go back to the trees for a moment here. What would you do to strengthen the protected tree ordinance and to punish those who remove trees illegally?
Mr. Biblarz, for 1 minute response.
I'm glad that we're talking about this again. I think it comes down to two things. One, making sure, as I've mentioned in prior answers, drafting ordinances in ways that are very tight so that there is very little legal wiggle room for the city to get out of its obligations. There's an old mantra in LA politics that it takes a ballot initiative or a lawsuit to get anything done in LA, and that's often the result of poorly drafted ordinances that leave too many porous loopholes for the city to not enforce. And the second piece that I also mentioned is about how we think about trees. Do we think of them as a luxury good, or do we think of them as an essential part of a vibrant and biodiverse and livable city? And that's my orientation to trees. They are a tremendous natural resource that should be preserved and expanded. They are a hallmark of a healthy and vibrant city. And it's painful to see that LA is so asleep at the wheel in a robust biodiverse city.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your response, please.
I believe we need to expand the protected tree ordinance to include a broader array of species of trees. In fact, I think we should include all trees of a certain size. Right now, people can cut down a 200-year-old tree if it's not under the list of protected species. And all trees provide shade. All trees provide some amount of habitat. All trees are how we maintain a cooler climate, keep ambient temperatures down up to 10 degrees cooler. And as the planet continues to get warmer, that's going to become increasingly important. And so I think as we move ahead, we need to expand the tree ordinance. When people are, particularly up in the hillsides, but down in the flats too, when people are developing on a lot, they should have to take consideration of big old trees, and maybe they should have to build around them, particularly up in the hillsides where you have people cutting down many old trees, flattening a lot and destroying habitat. Thank you.
Mr. Yebri, your 1 minute response.
Talked about this a little bit earlier. There's a massive dearth of green space and tree canopy in the 5th district and frankly throughout Los Angeles. And my priority will be to expand the tree canopy. As we talked about, the trees provide shade, they cool and clean the air, they reduce energy bills and enhance the quality of life in every neighborhood. Also, it's imperative that we expand green space more generally against overdevelopment, but also we got to reject bad ideas like turning Rancho Park into permanent housing. I'm categorically opposed to the idea that's come up with my conversations with folks in Bel Air too, including the idea of turning our golf courses, public golf courses, into housing. That's a terrible idea. We need more, not less green space. And while I have a couple more extra seconds, we haven't talked about an incredibly important issue that I hear from every day when I talk to folks in Bel Air, which is crime. And I think it's remiss of us not to talk about the heinous crime that took place, the gun violence a couple blocks away from the heart of the 5th district, right, really in the Laurel Canyon area and Coldwater Canyon. I'm the only candidate in this race who's consistently said we need more cops, more policing, done better, and to keep everyone safe. And that's my top priority as a council member.
Thank you. Joyce?
All right. The mayor must allow the police and other agencies to enforce the laws. We have laws and we have no enforcement, like the flight paths, which are supposedly prescribed for many old laws and are now non-existent due to the city of LA not doing its job.
So to the candidates, what is your proposal in that area to try to improve the situation?
So the
Mr.
question seems to
Yaroslavsky?
be about how we allow the police and other agencies to enforce the laws.
Yaroslavsky, your 1 minute.
Yeah, so when we have laws on the books and we don't enforce them, it fosters and breeds a sense of lawlessness. And I think a lot of Angelinas are feeling that right now. And it's a very unmooring, disorienting, scary feeling. And it's incumbent upon elected leaders to enforce the laws that are on the books. And if there are laws on the books that don't make sense to have on the books, we should streamline them or get them off the books. And we need to make sure we have enough police officers to respond to crime. We need enough planning inspectors to come out and make sure people are complying with code requirements. We need folks ensuring that our party house laws are being enforced. So there's a lot of enforcement that's not happening, and that's going to require us to hire some more people. And we need to trim the fat of the budget at the city. We need to find additional ways of increasing revenues consistently, and we need to fix our structural deficits. But we can't have a world-class city if we don't have enough.
Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your 1 minute response.
When I served the city as a city commissioner for nearly 4 years on the Civil Service Commission, I oversaw our city's personnel department. Back then, we had 40,000 employees and a budget of about $9 billion. 10 years later, we have 50,000 employees, an $11.5 billion budget, and we're not getting world-class city services. And a big part of it is our legislators at the city and our partners at the county legislate by press release and press conference. They say they're passing an ordinance that's going to address an issue, but they don't fund it. They don't have measures to enforce it, and they're not being held accountable. And that needs to change. We talked about Airbnbs, oil and gas wells. There's no inspection ordinance. No one is inspecting these things that are under our homes. 57 oil and gas wells at Pico and Doheny alone. There's a small spill December of 2021. And I want to talk about crime. We need more police officers. We're down to 9,340 right now from 10,000 that we used to have. I'm the only candidate who's consistently said we need more police officers. They got to do their job the right way. We got to hold them accountable, but they're going to run to the line of fire to protect our families. God bless them. And we need leaders who are going to say things like that.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 1 minute response.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So, I mean, we can't just pass an ordinance and just assume that's, wipe our hands. It's gonna implement itself, right? So let me give you an example. So we have an anti-harassment ordinance now that is supposed to protect renters from landlords who are unscrupulous. The fines that are included in the ordinance that the city can just exact on its own are so small that they can just be absorbed as the cost of business for the landlords. And so this ordinance is only going to be successful if people have legal representation. And yet we do not have a fully funded right to counsel in this city. And so many of our tenants who are struggling with landlords, and I was one of them, I've experienced this kind of this poor landlord situation, don't have the tools to make their lives whole. So we need to think about how all those policy tools combine and are implemented to actually get things done.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1 minute response.
As I mentioned, I teach at UCLA Law School, and one of the key lessons of early law school is the difference between law on the books and law in practice. And that is ultimately an enforcement question. And when we teach about how we can ensure that laws on the books are fully realized in our experience of the city, there are three tools. One, and I've mentioned this before, is that we write clear laws that are legible both to the enforcement agencies and to the public. Second, it's to ensure that the right enforcement agencies have clear marching orders about what the laws are and how they've been interpreted that give meat to what the law is actually meant to do. And third, it's ensuring that the proper agencies are sufficiently staffed and empowered to do the enforcement work that they are codified to be doing. Those are the three pieces of how I'll approach enforcement. This is ultimately a question about neighborhood services. If we can't accomplish small, how can you trust the city with the big?
Thank you. Joyce?
Somebody has asked how many questions have appeared regarding the ridgeline and wildlife ordinances, and I've just counted up those questions, and there are 6 questions about that. So I'm going to read another one of them now.
Joyce, we have another topic. Already covered that topic.
Actually, there have been so many questions about this that this question asks for an expansion in some areas. So I think I should probably read that one.
Okay.
Lots of CD5 residents are against the ridgeline and wildlife ordinances. What will you do to ensure the redrafting of these ordinances to protect homeowners' rights to rebuild their homes destroyed by natural disasters, as well as protect homeowners' current rights to renovate and expand their home size?
Mr. Yebri, your 1-minute response.
Sure. I think first off, like I said, these ordinances are important and worthwhile. It was a mistake to combine the two of them, ridgeline and wildlife. And we need to make a distinction between undeveloped land and developed land. Right? We think we all agree that Santa Monica Mountain's undeveloped land must be protected. But when it comes to private property, I think there's some legal issues if we take away private property rights. Right? If your house burns down, you have to be able to rebuild it, period. And also you shouldn't need to go to the city to get a variance for repairs, updates, to build a second story on your land. So I'm going to oppose any ordinance that's unreasonable in that regard. And that's why we need a litigator like me who's going to focus on the language, make sure that there are no problems or over breath, and then fight for the residents of Bel Air.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, your 1-minute response.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's an opportunity for a real win-win here. I think we can protect our hillsides and our wildlife, and at the same time protect the rights of homeowners to make changes to their homes, to rebuild their homes if necessary. And it starts with robust community engagement. I was the chair of the Mid-City West Neighborhood Council for 7 years. So I've run hundreds of public meetings. And I will take that we're protected by the Brown Act, and I will take that experience and make sure that we are having a robust community engagement process where that is fair, that is accountable, and where everybody feels that they can give their opinion and have their voice heard, so that we can arrive at a result that works for everybody.
Mr. Biblarz, your 1-minute response.
So, of course, I'm a firm believer in property rights and that people have a right to do with their private property, mostly what they wish. It's so telling, this ordinance, of the unclear ordinance drafting that I've been talking about. The idea of that we have to ask whether this ordinance applies to existing housing or not is a testament to the kinds of changes that we need and how ordinances are developed and how they're written. We can't rely on, oh, this won't be enforced in that way, oh, this won't be litigated in that way, around something as sensitive as people's housing, when our housing stock is so caught up in our own livelihoods. And when I've talked to members of this community about this ordinance, I can hear the fear in people's voices about their property going to zero in terms of net worth. Policy and policy process shouldn't inspire fear in people's voices. That's telling of a flawed process.
Thank you, Mr. Yebri. Ms. Yaroslavsky, the 1-minute response.
Everyone absolutely needs to be able to rebuild and to renovate and to build anew within reason. And like I said before, policymaking is a balance, and everyone who's impacted needs to be at the table. I have a history and proven track record of policymaking, building consensus by bringing communities together, creating a truly iterative process where the people who are most impacted have the most say in what the policy looks like and how it's implemented. And it's clear to me that as these policies were developed that are now sitting in the planning department, that wasn't the case. And I'm going to come in, I'm going to bring an excellent planning and land use deputy on, someone who knows these communities really well and who's committed to creating a really fair process where people's input is incorporated. These need to be fair and they need to be balanced. And I'm committed to making sure that that process is there. And I have a track record that shows that I can back that up.
Thank you. Joyce?
Okay, how are you going to help reduce crime?
Oh. Okay, Mr. Epstein.
This is such an important question. I've been very troubled with the increase in violent crime and hate crime, particularly that we've been experiencing in the 5th District. And I think part of the way we fix this issue is by focusing police work on police work. We are asking our police officers to respond to mental health emergencies, respond to our unhoused neighbors on a daily basis. And they have neither the training nor the interest in doing this work. We can replace those officers with mental health professionals, with homeless service outreach workers who will cost less money. And then we can use that savings to invest in proven solutions, including community policing. We need more police in our community and less police just in their cars or in their stations. We need to be building relationships between our police officers and among ourselves to keep ourselves safe.
Thank you. Mr. Biblarz, your 1-minute response.
The most important job of any elected official is keeping people safe. That's baseline. On this question, I am laser motivated by what we know works to reduce crime in the short run and create enduringly and lasting safe neighborhoods. We know that spot zoning doesn't work, but we also know that spot policing does. Concentrating police resources in areas experiencing upticks in crime is the most proven tactic for reducing crime, rather than calls for blanket and generalized policing. And second, if we look at Los Angeles's history and when we've seen real reductions in crime, especially violent crime, it's when we've been engaged in sustained, consistent conversations between credible messengers, community leaders, victims, and perpetrators of violence and the police. The Gang Youth Violence Reduction Program was transformative in the 2000s at precipitously reducing our violent crime rate, and those projects were abandoned as quickly as they were started. We need to re-engage those efforts to create real lasting safety.
Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your 1-minute response.
Thank you. I support a well-funded, well-trained, well-staffed, and accountable police department with officers focused on crime prevention and solving crimes. We need to shift officers from desk duty onto street duty and move officers away from doing non-emergency homeless response and nonviolent mental health calls. We also need to hire some additional police officers. We're starting to move in the direction of moving officers away from jobs that they never went to the academy to do, and we need to continue that and accelerate it. We really need mental health professionals and social workers doing that work of homelessness response and mental health response instead. So that's one piece, more officers out on the street doing the work that they went to the academy to do. The other piece of the public safety puzzle is deeply investing in the communities of Los Angeles, all the communities of Los Angeles, to make them truly healthy and safe. We need to be investing in affordable housing, job training programs, childcare, opportunities for people to move out of poverty and into the middle class. Because so much crime is a lagging indicator of people's economic situation. And so we need to be doing both of those things at the same time, funding the police department, funding communities.
Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your 1-minute response.
So while other candidates will change their positions depending on who they're speaking to, you'll always know where I stand, and I'll always be direct and honest with you. I'm not going to raise my hand and pledge to never hire any more police officers like some of my opponents have done. As a father of 4 young kids, nothing is more important to me than protecting my family, and nothing is more important to an ex-council member than protecting our community in the 5th Council District. That's why I've worked so hard over the last decade to keep my neighborhood in Westwood safe. And as part of my HOA in Comstock Hills, I co-chaired our public safety committee. I served on the city's gun violence prevention task force. I went through LAPD's Citizens Academy. and I have rolled out, the only candidate in this race, comprehensive, detailed plan to keep our community safe. It's on my website. I'll put it in the chat in a second. And unlike my opponents, I do believe that policing works. And like Councilmember Kretz, I believe we need more police officers, especially in areas where crime is up, including in the hillsides. Conversations and audits and childcare programs are important, but they won't stop bullets.
Thank you. That is the end of the questions. It's now time for closing statements from the candidates. You each have 2 minutes for your closing statement. Mr. Biblarz, it's your start.
You know, I'm going to take this conclusion opportunity as an opportunity to introduce myself, because we didn't get to do much of that at the top of this debate. I grew up in the heart of Jewish LA in Pico Robertson. I like to say 1 block south of Synagogue Row off of Pico. And my political origin story is really twofold. When I was 12, my family was evicted from our half of a duplex apartment. In the aftermath, we were chased around the city by housing affordability, and both my parents struggled very, very seriously with substance use, and luckily have both been in long-term recovery. Add to that coming of gay age under the dark cloud of Proposition 8. It did not always feel like the long arc of history would bend toward justice on gay rights, but I'm glad that the social movement that gay marriage engendered showed us that it would. That combination of this early childhood confrontation with inequality and being part of a social movement that impacted my identity so profoundly showed me that politics matters. It matters for my life, and it matters for the lives of people I care about. I've been working in research and activism ever since. I'm K through 12 LAUSD schools in the district. Go Yankees, Hamilton High. I believe there's 1 or 2 alumni on the call. I was at Harvard for college and graduate school and law school, and there I was lucky enough to be part of an inaugural cohort of professors and graduate students in economics, political science, and sociology, funded by the National Science Foundation, all of whom were dedicated to studying the rise of income and wealth inequality. My work in particular, how it intersected with issues of housing. My partner and I moved back to LA a few years ago and were painfully struck by the homeless and housing crisis. I saw a city that was failing to grapple with the magnitude of this problem, and as importantly, failing to diagnose it in a way that actually gave us a shot at solving it for good. Because if we don't get the diagnosis right, we have no hope of getting the treatment right. I am a research and data-driven academic. I believe in robust and ongoing community engagement in these communities that I love to my deep heart's core. Check us out at jimmybiblarz.com. My cell number is there. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ms. Yaroslavsky, your closing statement.
Thank you. I'm going to do the same. So I'm an environmental attorney, a policymaker. I'm a mom to 3 young kids. My husband and I live in South Carthage. I'm running because I'm really frustrated at the state of our city, and I want our neighborhoods to be places where we can all thrive. But they really don't feel like those places right now. And the way we bridge the gap between where we are and where we need to be as a city is through electing ethical, effective, and proven people into these seats of power. I spent a decade in the private sector as a land use attorney, and then as the general counsel of the climate change nonprofit. And for the last 6.5 years, I served as a senior policy advisor at LA County Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, making policies on behalf of LA County's 10 million people on climate and sustainability and the creative economy. I've seen firsthand just how much good government can do when it's working in partnership with communities. And I've done that work. I took the lead on creating LA County's first sustainability office, created the Clean Power Alliance, a utility that's providing 100% renewable power to more customers than any other utility in the United States. Spent 3 years leading the development, negotiation, and ultimate adoption by voters of Measure W, the Safe Clean Water Program. It's one of our region's largest jobs and infrastructure programs. It's become a national model for how to build sustainable green infrastructure. I'm a coalition builder. I know how to use the tools of government in partnership with community to get things done. My priorities on the council are to address the root causes of homelessness and poverty, to create more flexible, affordable housing, to get people off the streets quickly. 2, to make our communities safer and healthier by investing in both police and our communities. And 3, to transform LA into a climate resilient and environmentally just city, doing a lot of work in our hillsides to preserve them, keep them special. These problems are big and complex, but I have a track record of getting things done. I'll come into the job clear-eyed about the challenges and how best to navigate across a broad section, across a broad cross-section of constituencies. I have the support of folks like Congresswoman Karen Bass, Sierra Club, LA League of Conservation Voters, Sheila Kuehl. I know how to do this work because I've already been doing this work. I'm looking forward to partnering with you to make our community into what they need to become. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Yebri, your closing statement.
I love this city. I love it to my core. Los Angeles is a city of endless possibilities. Los Angeles enabled me and my refugee family to live the American dream. It allowed me to go from public schools in the 5th District to Yale and USC for law school. And that's why I've spent the last 2 decades to improve Los Angeles as a lawyer, nonprofit leader, and commissioner. But for far too long, City Hall has not reflected the energy, creativity, diversity, and energy of all of us in Los Angeles. Instead, we've elected the same tired insiders and bureaucrats who are unwilling and unable to challenge the status quo and exercise real leadership, and it shows. And now Los Angeles is at a crossroads. Los Angeles will either continue to decline, or together we're going to chart a new course with new leaders. I'm not a career politician or from a political dynasty. I'm a husband and father of 4 young kids, raising them a couple blocks from where I was raised in Westwood. And I want my family and your family and every family in Los Angeles to live in a city that's as vibrant and safe and hopeful and affordable as the one that welcomed me 40 years ago. I'm proud to have the broadest coalition of support in this entire race, legends like Henry Waxman, progressive leaders like Holly Mitchell, moderates like Joe Buscaino, and everyone in between. The only candidate to have the support of business organizations and labor unions. 1,300 leaders from the community in the 5th District have endorsed us, because I'm not someone who's going to kowtow to those who finance city council candidates. And I want to leave you with this. From the start of this campaign, I've been clear and consistent with my policy positions. I'm the only candidate who's consistently supported using our anti-camping ordinances to help improve the plight of people on our streets. And I've supported hiring more police officers. We may disagree, but I've always been honest with you. And the voters of the 5th District deserve leaders whose words they can believe and whose promises they can trust. I'd be honored to earn your vote in just a couple of weeks. I'll put my information in the chat. I'd be happy to
Thank you.
continue our conversation together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Epstein, your closing statement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for conducting this forum tonight. I'm running to make LA work for all of us. And I will bring leadership to the city council that is grounded in community, guided by compassion, and focused on results. I am a dad, a public policy analyst, and a seasoned community leader. I rent in Carthay Square with my wife and our 4-year-old daughter, who will be going to Carthay Elementary for TK in the fall. I've worked at the RAND Corporation and UCLA as a public policy researcher and a public health worker. I'm the only candidate in this race who's been elected in the 5th District 4 times to the Mid-City West Neighborhood Council, and my peers on the council elected me to be their chair 7 years in a row. My priorities are making sure this city is actually affordable, ending homelessness in a compassionate way, and taking local climate action. And I am proud to have made robust, significant progress on those issues within the 5th District. So I am the founder of the Midtown Los Angeles Homeless Coalition, which came up with the idea for the only bridge home shelter in the entire district, which now serves families experiencing homelessness at a repurposed motel on La Cienega Boulevard. I helped build the political will for the Point at La Brea permanent supportive housing project, which will be delivering 49 units of permanent supportive housing for our unhoused neighbors. It's one of only 2 projects currently in the works. That's not good enough. And I brought millions of dollars into my community for Safer Streets. It's the first time a neighborhood council has ever won a Metro grant to do something like that. It's that kind of robust, grassroots, muscular leadership on the ground that's responsive to the needs of individual communities that I will bring to this office. I look forward to engaging with you. You can find us at scottforla.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you. This concludes our candidate forum for the 5th Council District. We are grateful to our co-sponsor whose efforts made this event possible. And again, our strong thanks to the candidates for participating in today's forum and in today's democracy in Los Angeles. Also, our audience this evening, thank you for being here and submitting questions. Everyone, please be sure to mail in or drop off your ballot so that it's postmarked or received by June the 7th. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. Jimmy, feel better.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Have a good night, everyone.